Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of DE&I Unstructured Unscripted. I'm John Jacobs. I'm joined by my fellow co-founders Man Wong and Sunil Diao. Say hello.
Afternoon, everyone.
Also joined today by Bonnie the dog, who is residing on the bed just over my shoulder here. Hopefully we won't get interrupted for walkies halfway through this recording. So today, just a small subject we're going to be discussing. Try and keep this as succinct as possible, but it's very topical, and that is the gender pay gap reporting in the UK that's been widely lauded and criticised in equal measures from various corners for what it stands for and how it's conducted. Now, the reporting is for organisations, just to recap, of 250 staff plus in the UK, and it's a mandatory legal requirement for organisations to report on their gender pay gap, which is a median of the middle, basically the middle paid female in an organisation versus the middle paid male in an organisation. Now, there's a number of themes, I guess, within this that we can discuss, but the data within this year's report is arguably somewhat distorted because of the furlough scheme and the fact that COVID's impact that may have had on that, and the disproportionate amount of females who were affected by furlough versus male, which is a whole topic in itself. So I just wanted to have a conversation today about how you guys see the gender pay gap, whether you think it's how effective you think it is. I mean, we had a 6-month extension on it because of COVID, and it seems to me that a lot of organisations have used that as somewhat of an excuse to maybe not take the reporting seriously, or hide behind COVID as a reason as to why they haven't moved forward with their gender pay gap. So, who wants to kick us off on that?
Okay. I think it's going to start. Let's start by rewinding it back. Yes, this data is very, I think it's very important. It shows as a measurement of progress. I suppose my main concern is, where is it in priority list for companies, as opposed to the results. Yes, the results are very important, but we also encountered COVID, and as such, this was suspended for a year. But even up to approaching COVID, I think there was a stat that came out that 40% of companies still hadn't put any sort of reports in at that time, in that moment. So leaving it to the very last minute before they presented that data. Then it was obviously marked forward by another 6 months, and we got the results. I think the CIPD did a review on the submissions, and they've shown that 11% reduction in the number of companies now presenting and reporting this data. Now, there's various reasons for that, because they've probably fallen out of the 250 staff, that could have decreased in size. But for me, I think that the big question is from against priorities, because this is a voluntary thing as well. You can voluntarily submit your data and information, and I would like to see more companies voluntarily doing that because they're being more transparent. My concern is that it's not on a priority list, and what should be really, if you've got your business in gear and you've got your data collating and understanding where your salary levels are, etc., should be a simple process of extracting and going, here's our data, and this is where we're at on it. For me, that's more the concern or the questionable area about where is this on that priority.
Yeah, go on, man.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. I think when you even start with this thing, there's so many layers to it. You could go statistic with it. Was it an 11% decrease? But then, as you say, there's a bit of a skew this year in terms of reporting due to COVID, and then that will give you suggestion about the prioritization of where it is in comparison to all the sort of business and commercial objectives that they may have. I think using things like median doesn't really tell this full story as well. It kind of doesn't give you the full reflection as to the higher paying roles that men occupy as well in this side. And for me, it kind of boils down to access more so than anything else. The gender pay gap report for me really tells me that there is a real lack of representation for women across some of the, these organizations that are over 250 people, and then where the representation exists aren't in those kind of senior positions, management roles, C-suite, which isn't news to anybody, but it's continually highlighting this lack of representation is the thing that we need to sort of take more note of. What are we actually doing on these things? I think, the lack of reporting, either voluntarily or mandated, does give you wiser suspicion of prioritization. But there's also a in my belief, when we speak to some organizations, this fear of being transparent about where they are in the pay gap side. Look, we're a business startup. We're free men. So our pay gap is terrible, obviously, right? There's no women in here to talk about, but we have unofficially been speaking a lot about how do we address that in the future when we scale up. Businesses that are over 250 people can do that, can talk about how they engage with women in the communities to get them into the workforce. How do they keep these people, limit the attrition? How do they get them up the ranks so that they can get representation across these senior management roles, and then naturally pay them accordingly to balance out the pay gap? And for me, that's the importance here. The pay gap's not going to represent a real healthy picture of your organization, but it shouldn't be the only barometer that we as individuals use to make judgments, I suppose, on these organizations. It's more about what they're going to do with that information now they've established it, and how they can actually change these things.
You mentioned, man, about company reputation, but surely it's more damaging for organizations who opt out of reporting voluntarily, and they will take whatever comes their way. But in the past, certainly the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the fines haven't been dished out, right? That they just haven't done that in terms of, the history we're going back here is only to 2017 when this became mandatory. So we've only got 2-3 years worth of data to call upon, but they haven't actually gone and charged or fined any organizations for non-submittal at this point. So companies haven't necessarily got that fear factor. They'll probably take it on the chin. And what the EHRC are trying to do is more about the brand exercise and the kind of publicly naming and shaming, is effectively putting these companies into stocks. Now that is really damaging for organizations who on the face of it are saying they want to hire more women. And by not doing these reporting, whether they like it, whether they've got stuff to hide or not, so it's more damaging not to report. And they should face up to these things and be seen to be taking actions publicly to address it rather than hiding away from it.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, JJ, on that, I think this feeding, this spirals out into so many different areas, but this is just linking to exec level pay and bonuses. We know it has to be driven from the top. Now, if there's no submission, or if there's a wide gap that we're seeing that's not showing any progress, no one's expecting it to come close overnight, because there's some industry sectors there that historically have had a predominantly male sort of senior level representation. So does this feed in now into how exec levels bonuses are paid out, etc.? Should that now come into play? I think also there's a wider picture here about talent migration. The statistics showed obviously that London and the South East has a wider gap than areas like Wales and Scotland. Now, we're talking about Gen Zs here. We're talking about what they're reviewing, where to work, who to work for. Now, are we in danger now of seeing, as this gap doesn't close, a wider migration of Gen Zs going, well, don't want to work in this region. There's nothing really in my region. I need to go elsewhere. I need to maybe think about leaving the UK, for example. So there's that wide, and Boris Johnson yesterday on his political speech, obviously, was talking about talent and being able to give access to jobs and higher salaries, higher skill levels, etc. But if we have stats like this coming out, they're not going to stick around in the UK. They're going to look elsewhere.
You mentioned geographies, and that's a valid point, but also sectors as well. Same argument. You've got the same sectors coming up at the top of this, the widest gap, time and time again. And what are they doing about it? You look at education, financial services. These are sectors where there are large populations of women, but at the lower paid levels of the ranks. Education. I mean, how many female teachers are there? Yet there's a disparity between female teachers and female leadership within education. And so what's being done? Like there's obviously a penalty that mothers probably have to pay, you know, or females have to pay within that sector specifically. So is that going to discourage more women coming into that sector who want to aspire to be on the leadership in years to come?
It's ingrained, isn't it? It's such a systemic thing there, isn't it? You know, if you know, talk leadership. That's why the term median is a bit of a red herring here. You know, it kind of distracts you from actual conversation here around about, you know, where the best paying roles are and who occupies those kind of positions. And so it's all about representation, because you just see what you believe, don't you? Or sorry, you believe what you see rather. So and people end up hiring in their own guise and what they believe is to be the truth, right? If, you know, it's the same for not only as gender, but it becomes a social mobility dynamics, you know, ethnicity, etc., all that sort of stuff. So the gender pay gap is important to highlight whether change and progress has been made, but it's about digging into these reports specifically across industries, organizations and whatnot, to understand actually now you've got this gap. What are you doing to narrow it in terms of your candidate attraction, candidate selection processes, and then also once they're in, what are you doing to elevate them within those businesses? Sorry, Sina.
I was just about to say on that, expand on that, man. I think the most important thing, we see a lot of the publications on the stats, on the data, lack of movement, lack of progression. You drill down into further, there's an ethnicity gap now within that pay gap, right? So it goes even further. But we don't really see a lot of companies. What's the plan?
That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point, right?
What is the plan and what's happening? And we know from engaging with companies at the moment, and we're working with a few, that we're helping them to identify these issues and put a plan in place because they're progressive and they want to do something about it. But I think it's a fear of companies understanding, well, what do we do with this? How do we close this gap? And then rather than coming out and seeking support or working in partnerships, etc., they go very silent, don't say anything, and then you just see tick box initiatives about equal pay, etc., and nothing else about it. I think that kind of, for me to finish off, is what I'm quite keen to see. What is the strategy? What is the plan to close this gap?
Well, for me, you know, like John was just saying, this is what, 4 years old, 2017, right? So in his 5th year. And unless you can see some sort of penalty of some sort, right? Nothing, you know, you can argue that things don't change. It's a mandatory thing, and for them, it's kind of like, oh, seasonally speaking, it's like an audit, isn't it? So a large scale administrative task, it's resource heavy, it's burdened, and that's tricky for them. But what's the fallout really? You know, they're not that bothered by it. I mean, reading the BBC earlier, it was 10 companies with the highest pay gap towards men. Out of the 10 companies, 6 of which are in financial services. You know, from a representational perspective, financial services haven't been clean for the last sort of 13, 15 years. You know, I mean, since 2008, right? And before then, if you can recall these sort of things. But the big change it will become about sentiment and whether actually, how do we, you know, everybody's talking about inclusion and we keep talking about it. You can't measure it. Well, what if you could? And what if you could really understand the people that you're trying to engage with? What do they think about your pay gap reports? And does that change their opinion as to whether they should even consider you as an organization? I think those are the kind of magic bullets that we might need to see.
Sorry, Jay. I was just going to ask, I'm really keen to understand. I always see loads of comments by senior execs, but where are HR teams and where are they? What are they saying about this? Because, you know, they're presenting these statistics for the business on behalf of the business, etc. But where are they? What's their thoughts on this? Because I always see a different voice coming out from you know, execs, and I never really hear much from HR teams and what their views are regards to this situation and the statistics coming out.
Yeah, it's a topic which the more you talk about it, the more it grows legs in different ways. But you know, there is a lot of organisations who are virtue signaling, I think, in this, particularly in this last period that we've been through in this last couple of years. Talk a good game, but actually when it comes to the actions, they don't follow that through. You don't see that, and I think that seems to be coming through loud and clear from this conversation with your perspectives as well.
I think a last point from me, mate, is just going back to the data points. I think what's also at the top of the conversation is probably the more prevalent data point that you can capture. Actually, the findings and the reports is so massively skewed because of COVID, and also because furlough staff aren't incorporated in terms of the data. And then depending what sources you read, staff that tend to be furloughed are women also. So that we're going to see some peaks and troughs and skews that aren't necessarily a true reflection of what an organization is in terms of what its pay gap report is. So therefore, actually, the next default thing that I find really interesting is who actually submitted it. And it stems back into that prioritization piece. Next year is going to be the telling one. When everybody's,
I think next year is going to be super interesting, because it will really be a case of, have we let the pandemic undo some of the progress we've been making on this? Because we made progress on the last report. There was a closing of the gap. This year there was none. It was parity. It was the same as it had been before. So no further progress was made. So you do have to take this year's report with a little bit of a pinch of salt in terms of the data. But next year, companies, they should be working their socks off in the meantime, because next year there has to be progress, because there'll be no hiding place, there'll be no furlough scheme in place. It's finished now. So it'll be super interesting to see how progress is made between now and the next reporting deadline. And I don't know, actually, it's something I need to look at, if the next reporting deadline is March, because this one's just moved back 6 months. So
that's right,
it might not be that far away around the corner.
Be super interesting, wouldn't it?
All right, cool. Well, let's wrap this one up for this week, guys. Thank you very much for your time on it. And we'll pick up again.
Magic. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.